Breaking down the complexities and nuances that occur within these 21 to 24 frets can be a monumental task. It can take months or years to really get a firm grasp on what occurs on the fretboard. Thankfully, there are ways of breaking down the fretboard to make this process a lot easier. My favorite is the CAGED system. So what is the CAGED system, you might ask? Well, it's an acronym. Acronym? Are musical notes allowed to be acronyms? Well, anyway, it's more of a simple way of naming the chord shapes that we're used to so that they make better sense across the entirety of the fretboard. We're going to talk about that in a second, as it's part of the 4 levels of the CAGED system. Now, this is a bit of a beginner to intermediate lesson. If you feel like you're a bit past it, I have 3 modifiers at the very end that I can share with you that will make this into a comprehensive chord lesson that will keep you busy for a while. Now, level 1 of the CAGED system is just major chords. We're going to organize the major chords aligned on the fretboard akin to the CAGED system so that it starts making sense. This is the foundation that the whole CAGED system is based on. So the first chords that we learned in our guitar playing careers are the open chords. We have C, we have G, we have D, we have A, and we have E. You may have also learned F, maybe B, maybe this B7. The beautiful thing about those chords is that is what the entirety of the CAGED system is made up of. We're going to utilize a bit of a bar chord style approach to make those chords work in all the different positions. Within the CAGED system, we're going to have a C chord, an A chord, a G chord, an E chord, and a D chord. CAGED. But instead of playing them like this, we're going to line them up so they all make C chords. So we have our C chord, A, G, E, and D. If you notice, I didn't fill out all of those chords. That's because some of the shapes are a bit difficult to play in a bar chord format. Let's talk about those. So, obviously we have a C chord here. This is our C shape. If we were to move that up 2 frets, we have a D chord, and we've incorporated our bar into that. The bar is acting like our new nut, so we're actually using kind of an open chord style thing, akin to if we had a capo there, except we're using our finger. So that's our C shape. Our A shape here, it's also known as a root 5 bar chord if you've learned out of any method books. We're on the 3rd fret here for this, and you can play it with your pinky or your ring finger, but that's our A shape. If you notice, we took our C chord here, we kept this root note here, and now we're playing an A shape C chord. Going up next, C, A, G, our G chord. There it is. I haven't completed this chord because that's a bit of a stretch. Quite the stretch here. So what we're going to do is we're going to chop that in half. We could either use the bottom half, which is nice for things like this, or we could do this, which sounds a bit thin, but we can do a lot of stuff with this. We can do this, we can do. This is also where the Neo Soul C major 7 comes into play. Going up, we have the E shape. Now this should look pretty familiar to you. This is where some of the Hendrix-isms exist. You can do things like that. You can do. And then finally we have the D shape chord. That's just going to look like this for now. We're going to remember this as the D shape chord because there are a couple different ways we can play this. We can either play this with the 3rd on the bass, making it a 1st inversion chord, or we could play it like this with the top 3 strings, which is just a fairly pleasant triad. So that's the basis of level 1. Now we only really touched C major here. Now if you really wanted to be comprehensive with level 1, you could take that through all 12 keys. And if you wanted to practice some music theory along with this, you could take this progression through the circle of fifths and work on it for a while that way. You could also work on your timing by playing along with a metronome. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just doing whole notes. Next on the circle of fifths is going to be G. So level 2 of the CAGED system is breaking down these chords into triads. Triads meaning the root, the third, and the fifth of each chord. We're only going to have 3-note voicings for each chord. So breaking down each position, if we had a C-shape C right here, we can find triads just by locating the root, the third, and the fifth in each chord. The root, the third, and the fifth of a C major is C, E, G. So here, we have a C, we have an E, and we have a G. Here's our next one. We have a C, E, and a G. Here's our next one. E, G, C. Here's our next one. G, C, E. So there are our triads in the C shape. If we were in the key of D, we could do that as well. Key of G. So as we keep moving up, we may not always have 4 triads available to us, and we need to learn how to adapt around there. Like in the case of the A shape, our first one is kind of this power chord thing here. We can also grab the G below it. But we could also jump up here and grab this E. We can kind of borrow it from the G shape. And there's our first triad. Our next triad is this really simple one right here. And then our next triad from that. Let's take a look at the G shape. We have this one, very similar to this one. We have, here's a layover from the A shape one. And then here's a little bit of a hollow sounding one. It's because we have 2 C's, 2 roots. That one doesn't really sound that great. We can change it to this. But that kind of falls under the power chord thing. And all of a sudden we're in our E shape. So from here, you notice I borrowed this last E from the D shape. So from the D shape, we really only have this and this as our true triads. If we wanted to, we could grab this kind of spread voicing. It sounds really nice. But those are our triads that are available to us. So again, taking those all through the circle of fifths, maybe in one range of the guitar, we'll go up to the 5th fret here. So level 3, going over the scales associated with each position. So we typically call these pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, pattern 4, and pattern 5 scales, each associating to C, A, G, E, D, because if I were to say play a G-shaped C scale, I mean, it sounds pretty confusing when it's associated with chords too. So we can refer to them as patterns as well. But in terms of scales, because we're not going to necessarily be immediately seeing the chord shape, we're going to refer to them as patterns. I'll still make mention of the chord shape they're associated with though. Let's go ahead and move the key up to D so that we can utilize more fretted notes. That way we don't have to worry about added confusion from open strings. So here we are, this is a C-shaped D chord. The scale here, not stopping on the roots and playing throughout the position, sounds like this. And as we keep moving up the CAGED system, we can start to see the scale-chord relationship. Here's the G shape. E shape. And then finally D shape. This is a great one to practice with a metronome, and keep in mind that may have looked complex, but it's really just the same 5 shapes, just putting them in different positions. So it's a lot easier than you realize. And then finally, level 4 is arpeggios based around each chord. So arpeggios are just the elaboration of a chord based in single notes. So we have a root, we have a third, we have a fifth, we have a root, third, fifth, root. So taking it around each chord shape, we have something that looks like this in the key of F. Those are all the arpeggios. Now, working something like that through any kind of chord progression can be tremendous practice, especially for your soloing or improvising. If you're thinking about getting into jazz or fusion, or even if you just want to kind of spice up some rock licks, a lot of these arpeggios are great stepping stones to incorporating some more interesting things into your improvising. Just a D to an A here below the 5th fret can open up new worlds of possibilities for improvising. It kind of sounds like that scene from that movie where Ralph Macchio takes on the devil in a guitar battle. So those are my 4 levels of the CAGED system. Now they do seem complex at first, but they do pay off in dividends long term, and as you practice, they get a lot easier. Now I wanted to make mention of some modifiers to the levels of the CAGED system that will make it more useful in the long run. These are meant for guitarists who maybe are used to the CAGED system already, or maybe they've been introduced and they want to see where it continues to go. So modifier number 1 is all chord tonalities. We really only went over major chords here, but as we know, minor chords exist, dominant 7th chords exist, major 7th chords exist, minor 7th chords exist, diminished and augmented chords exist. So working your way around some of the more complex chord tonalities can be very helpful, especially things like augmented chords. So that'll keep you busy for some time, but modifier 2 is taking it through any and all scales that you're aware of. So things like the harmonic minor, the melodic minor. Working in a Lydian context of like a C major can be really interesting. And recognizing the fact that that's basically a G major scale, just different. Some of these practice routines can open the doors for musical epiphanies, which can help connect the dots for some of the weirder music theory stuff. The last modifier, modifier 3, is working out all the chord extensions for each chord throughout the CAGED system. This includes your sharp 9s, your flat 9s, your sharp 5s, flat 5s, minor major 7s, sharp 11s, 13 chords, and being able to play each chord extension inside of each level of the CAGED system. Now that's something that would take time and energy and a lot of it, but it's not something you need to do every day. If at any point you feel like you're getting sick of the CAGED system, maybe mix it up and incorporate a 13th into each chord. So I hope this video not only gave you some better practice ideas, but it gave you just an idea of how encompassing the CAGED system can be. It's not meant to be something that you do every single day or have a mastery of. It's just an organizational tool. I think it's helpful to know how far it can actually go though. A great way to work on this stuff is to infuse it with other practice regimens. Things like working on time or maybe writing a new part for a guitar track. Even like incorporating it into a solo or learning how to play with yourself. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment. It really helps me out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.